All right, well, it's 7 o'clock and we're going to get started here right on time so that we can get through this. There's a lot of material. Looks like we've got over 200 participants. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and to learn about aviation parts. And I'll turn my video on momentarily just to say hello. Should be on. And with me tonight, I have Ryan Newman. He is the operations side of the FAA safety team here at San Antonio. I'm Gary Mitchum. I'm the airworthiness component. And we also have Andrew, and I'm going to try to pronounce your last name, Andrew. Danavaro. He's an FAA inspector. And where are you from, Andrew?
Oakland, California. Oakland, Fisdale.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, the FAA safety team, the FAST team's mission is, in a nutshell, basically to lower the nation's accident rate. And we do that by conveying safety principles and practices through training, outreach, and education. And our FAST team topic of the quarter is aviation parts. So I thought that would be a good topic. Overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. Hopefully by the end of this, you're going to know how to determine if parts are eligible for installation. You're going to know some options when there's no eligible part available. We're going to look at some of the regulations and advisory circulars related to parts. Going to look briefly at life-limited parts. Going to look at overhaul versus rebuilt parts. And then a program called VARMA, which is the Vintage Aircraft Replacement and Modification article. And we're going to look at quite a few unapproved parts examples. And to state the obvious, an aircraft is made up of its component parts. And one thing I will tell you throughout the presentation, you may want to have your camera ready and take a picture of some of these slides for future reference. Some people find that helpful. So an aircraft must be airworthy, and just to review the definition of airworthiness, two conditions have to be met. And the first is the aircraft must conform to its type design. And the second one is the aircraft must be in condition for safe operation. And that definition can be found in 14 CFR 3.5. And this includes aircraft parts that are installed in the aircraft. All the parts have to be airworthy and have to meet those two conditions. So when do parts become unairworthy and require replacement? Well, there's quite a few reasons. Wear and tear, damage, maybe they're out of tolerance limits. Could be parts failure or a timed out part. And life-limited parts would be listed in the type certificate data sheet. Airworthiness limitations section would also list the life-limited parts. And when parts do get worn beyond safe limits, damaged or timed out, it's likely that they no longer meet their type design. The main regulations pertaining to parts are Part 21, which covers certification, manufacturing, replacement, modification, and installation, and Part 45, which is identification of aircraft products and related products. So Part 45, just a couple slides here on that. It gives the marking requirements for life-limited, PMA, TSO, and critical parts. And that's in subpart B. And you can see that eliminator, like it's the interference eliminator. and it's marked FAA-PMA. Part 21 is the certification procedures for products and articles, and it gives you the requirements and process for the approval to manufacture parts. Some of the important subparts will be subpart B, covers type certificate. E is supplemental type certificate. Subpart G is production certificate. Subpart H covers airworthiness certificates. K is PMA, and part O, or subpart O, is for TSO. So those are all under part 21. There's an excellent advisory circular that if you're dealing with parts, everybody should have a copy of this. And it's AC 20-62E. So all aircraft parts must be eligible for installation. And so this means they have an approved design, they are properly produced, they are appropriate for the application, for the aircraft model and serial number. They are properly maintained, that pertains to used parts, and they are properly documented, whether it's a used part or a new part. So suppose you don't have an eligible part. What are some of your options? Well, operations can be restricted. For instance, maybe the part is only required for night only. And the reference for that is 91-213D. Aircraft can be grounded if the required part is not available or missing. The aircraft is then not airworthy, and it's has to be grounded. Some equipment can be removed, deactivated, and placarded if it is eligible and it meets the requirements of 91-213D. If a minimum equipment list, an MEL, is available and a letter of authorization has been issued, some parts and systems can be deferred. The repair can be deferred. So those are your options. Here's a pretty nifty chart showing at the top the certification basis of aircraft and aircraft parts, manufacturer's type design, whether it be reflected in the type certificate data sheet, drawings. For parts, maybe it's a TSO, PMA, STC, or production certificate. So once they produce their part and to the standard at the top, they have to prove conformity to the type design. So they do have to prove that the part conforms to the design. And on the left side, you see condition for safe operation, and you can see that that's modified by wear and tear. And at the bottom, maintenance and documentation. So the part has to be properly maintained, and the other documentation would be pointing towards the fact that it's been properly produced. So a couple months ago, my Ford F-150 wipers started running on their own and wouldn't stop. So I went online and bought this wiper turn signal switch from Amazon. Only cost $29. I got it the next day. And it worked pretty good. Didn't feel like the factory original, but it does work. And you can install any part you want in your Ford F-150 or in an experimental aircraft. But you may not install any part you want into a type certificated aircraft. And here's the Part 43 applicability statement. Part 43 covers maintenance. And it says this part does not apply to an aircraft that has an experimental certificate. And I'm paraphrasing these regulations. If you want to take the time to read the full regs, just be aware I am paraphrasing. But it does say Part 43 applies to light sport. So Part 21.9 talks about producers of parts if they know or should know that it's going to be installed on a type certificated product, and they may not produce the article unless it's produced under these 7 items. Type certificate, FAA production approval, and there's 4 types of production approval. Or if it's a standard part, such as nut or bolt, or a commercial part, or if it's produced by an owner or operator, or if it's fabricated by an appropriately rated certificate holder. And the last one is any manner approved by the FAA. And we're going to look at each one of those items in a little bit of detail. Here's the 4 types of production approval that the FAA issues. First one is produced under a type certificate. It normally leads to a production certificate. This would probably be the entire aircraft and all the parts. The next one is produced under a supplemental type certificate, which usually leads to a production certificate. Number 3, produced in accordance with Parts Manufacturing Approval, PMA. And the PMA is both a design and production approval. And they have demonstrated the capability to design and manufacture the part to the specific FAA requirements. And 4th, the TSO authorization is both an FAA design and production approval, similar to the PMA. Standard parts are nuts and bolts, for example, and they conform to an established industry or US specification. There's some examples: AN, MS, SAE. And no FAA production approval is required. And so this table here, we have AN, MS, NAPA parts. And NAPA means not approved part for aviation. For the most part, you can't just go down to the automotive store and buy parts and put them on your aircraft. But later on, we will see an example where you can do that. Another type of a properly produced part is a commercial part. It's covered under that regulation that's listed. And it's an article that is listed on an FAA-approved commercial parts list. It has the design approval holder's instructions for airworthiness. And there's 2 ACs related to commercial parts, and you can see them on the screen, 2145 and 20-168. Now, these commercial articles are often produced by major manufacturers like consumer electronics, and aviation represents a very small share of their overall business. And I listed some examples there as like Sony or Pioneer or Krups. And some part examples would be like a sink valve or a reading lamp. And generally, the failure of a commercial part would not degrade the level of safety of the product. No FAA production approval is required. In other words, Sony, Pioneer, so on and so forth, they don't need FAA production approval. Properly produced foreign parts. They're produced in a foreign country and accepted by the FAA in accordance with a bilateral agreement. And that advisory circular, 21-23, lists all the countries that we have bilateral agreements with. Generally, foreign parts will come with an EASA Form 1, which is similar to our 8130-3. Properly produced, fabricated by an appropriately rated certificate holder with a quality system, and consumed in the repair or alteration of a product under Part 43. So persons authorized to perform maintenance would have to fabricate these parts because it's done in a repair or alteration. So I listed the folks that can perform maintenance there. Part 145 repair station, they'll follow their manual, and they have to do it in accordance with their capabilities list. Certificated A&P mechanic, they would probably follow AC 43-18. And keep in mind that only an A&P with an IA, inspection authorization, can return to service a major repair or major alteration. And air carriers can also perform maintenance. And CAMP, Part 135 on demand is a 10 or more passenger carrier, and they maintain their aircraft under a CAMP, Continuous Airworthiness Maintenance Program. And there's the snippet from that AC, fabrication of aircraft parts by maintenance personnel, 4318. Another properly produced part is an owner-produced part. And an aircraft owner most likely does not have the expertise or the equipment to produce an aviation part. So they are permitted to hire someone else, certificated or non-certificated, to produce the part under certain conditions. And here's the conditions. It's allowed under this regulation, 21.303, paragraph B2. And the owner must participate in the production of the part in one of 5 ways. And there was an FAA memo dated August 5th, 1993. I think it was a legal, came out of the legal department. And there's the, it came from the chief counsel, and that answered the question. And the part has to be for maintaining or altering his own product, his own aircraft. Cannot be for sale. And it's considered a new part. So how can an owner participate? Well, here's the 5 ways that an owner can participate. They can participate if they provide the manufacturer with design or performance data, if they provide the materials, if they provide the fabrication process or assembly method, if they provide the manufacturer with quality control procedures, or if the owner personally supervises the manufacture of the new part. And I had an interesting, I had one of our IAs in San Antonio district provide this example of an owner-produced part. And this came about when I was doing the presentation on exhaust systems. And he was working on this Taylor craft in 1943. And this owner-produced exhaust system, it was built in 1995, and it's lasted 29 years and still going strong. And it was great because he also provided me with the letter that the owner gave to the aircraft exhaust systems company, and explained everything how he wanted it built. And we're going to go through that. So here's the first one. He told him how to design it. He provided the materials. He purchased and provided the materials. He told him how to fabricate and assemble it. Told him build it in a fixture using processes and assembly methods outlined in those ACs that are listed there. He also listed quality control. Told him the process specifications. And the fifth thing that he did was he personally supervised the manufacture of the part. And he said that upon receipt, he'll inspect the part, make sure it was made in accordance with his instructions. He even told them that to understand they are building an owner-produced part in accordance with 21303. So I thought that was a pretty good example of how to do it and do it correctly. I had another IA send me this thing he came across online about 3D printed aircraft parts. And here was where somebody took a 3D printer and produced a spinner support for this Beechcraft. And compliance to the existing rules per 21.9 for owner produced and 4313 must be met, whether a part is being fabricated using additive manufacturing technology, which is what 3D printing is, or traditional methods. And remember the performance rule? It says the product worked on will be at least equal to its original or properly altered condition. Now, I think we could agree that a part milled from a solid block of aluminum versus a part made by adding layers of powdered aluminum, like in a 3D printing operation, is this equal to the original? I think everybody knows the answer to that. No, it is not. So we do have an FAA order, and it's in volumes, it's in our order 8900, volume 6, chapter 11, section 29, about 3D printing. And you can find that at drs.faa.gov. Look under orders and then find the 8900, and you can find that, and it gives a lot more detail on 3D printing or additive manufacturing. So what is an unapproved part? So any part that fails to meet any of the approval requirements pursuant to 21.8 or 21.9 is an unapproved part. So basically, if it doesn't meet the criteria that we've looked at, it's an unapproved part. Here's a real nice chart from AC 21-45, and it shows approved parts are under a production certificate, PMA or TSO. I would add TC to that also. Those are the 4 approved production methods. And it shows acceptable parts are owner-operator produced parts, standard parts. Remember the AN, MS, nuts and bolts, so forth. And then the commercial parts. Remember, those are on a commercial parts list by the production approval holder. And then we have unapproved parts or suspected unapproved parts. I did want to introduce this vintage aircraft replacement and modification article, this VARMA program the FAA came up with. And it's to try to keep vintage aircraft flying when parts or materials are no longer available or obsolete. It's based on those 2 ACs, AC 23-27, and the one that we previously looked at, AC 43-18. Has to meet some criteria before you can use VARMA. Has to be type certificated before January 1st of 1980. In other words, it's an old aircraft, fixed wing, reciprocating engine, unpressurized, and 12,500 pounds or less. And it has to be certificated under one of those certification bases that's listed. Now, remember where we said NAPA means not approved part for aviation? Well, a starter solenoid is a very common item, and VARMA was used to allow a NAPA provided 12-volt solenoid to be installed in a particular aircraft. And that's just one example. And each request and approval is only good for a specific serial number aircraft. So just, don't do this unless you have approval from VARMA. And here is the contact information for those who are interested. This would be a good picture to take of this slide. Just get a hold of Scott Foreman, and he's at Aircraft Certification Branch. And there's the phone number, and there's his email. Now, if Scott retires, or for whatever reason you can't get a hold of him, you can go to FAA.gov, and under About, you will find offices, and then you find the certification branches listed. So you can find the certification branch near you. I want to talk a little bit about approved part versus appropriate parts. Just because a part is an approved or acceptable part doesn't mean it's appropriate for a particular application. Here's an aircraft accident. This PA-28 crashed. This was in Louisiana. He had just picked the aircraft up from an annual, and the engine seized after 5 minutes. So he had to do a forced landing on a highway. He hit a semi-truck. The pilot was seriously injured, and the aircraft was destroyed. And the cause of this accident was the installation of an incorrect engine oil drain valve. And when he retracted the gear, the nose gear hit this valve, and all the oil came out. And so it was failure of maintenance personnel to comply with the AD regarding the engine oil drain valve. So there was a service letter issued, and then the FAA issued an AD a year later, and they issued another service manual with a cautionary note. All three warned of improper valves and damage oil loss. Here's just a snip out of that service manual. And I think the AD incorporated this also, and it's showing where to put the caution placards. It says only use the Piper approved oil drain. There's the AD. And it says use only Piper approved part. So you can see the correct Piper part on the left and an incorrect valve of the accident aircraft on the right. So the IAA replaced the oil drain during an annual because it was leaking. And he used this, looks like an approved part. It lists a mil number and a TSO. There's the log entry. Said the oil valve stuck open during oil change. New one installed and clearance checked with the landing gear verified during retract tests. So it's funny how things can happen in the air that they don't happen on the ground with the aircraft and jacks. But it happened. Here's the picture of the damaged valve where all the oil came out. So the mechanic was not aware of that AD, the service letter, or the manual. And this AD of putting those placards on was never accomplished since 1981. This may have prevented that accident. So IAA is conducting engine inspections from 1981 to 2019 did not ensure AD compliance. So the point I wanted to make on that is just because it's an approved part, it doesn't mean it's appropriate for your particular aircraft installation. So make sure anytime you're not using the manufacturer's recommended part, you're maybe using a substitute that, it's an approved part, but it's not the manufacturer's. Just use extra caution. So where are we? Eligible for installation. We've looked at so far that we've looked at the approved design. We've looked at how parts are properly produced, and we just looked at the part being appropriate for the application. So we've got to look at how parts are properly maintained. And here we're talking about used parts. And how parts are properly documented, whether they're new or used. So used parts must be properly maintained. So it goes back to the performance rule, 14 CFR 4313, says you shall use the methods, techniques, and practices prescribed in the current manufacturer's maintenance manual or ICA. You'll use methods, techniques, and practices recommended by the manufacturer or the administrator. You'll use tools, equipment, test apparatus, special equipment per the manufacturer or administrator in accordance with industry accepted practices. And you shall do the work in such a manner and use materials of such quality that the condition is at least equal to its original or properly altered condition. So here's a case where they put the wrong oil filter on this aircraft, and it was a non-aviation oil filter, and the engine blew apart. Bad things can happen. When you're looking at used parts that have been maintained, make sure it was, worked on, maintained by somebody that's authorized to perform maintenance under 43.3. And I've listed them all there. Those are the folks that can perform maintenance. And also that a person that is approved to or authorized to return to service is found in 43.7. So it's one thing to work on a aircraft or a part. It's another thing to return it to service. So I've listed the folks that are authorized to return to service: airframe mechanic, power plants mechanic, and IA, repair station, manufacturer, air carrier, and a pilot, private pilot or greater can approve for return to service preventative maintenance. A little bit about life limited parts. Any part for which a mandatory replacement limit is specified in the type design, the ICA, or the airworthiness limitations section of the maintenance manual. The ICA contains the airworthiness limitations, including life limits, and it's part of the type design. Life limit can be expressed in cycles, the number of landing, length of time in service, calendar time, or a combination. It's hard to find life limited parts on smaller fixed wing aircraft, but I did dig this one up. This is off a Cessna P210, and in the type certificate data sheet, it says the windshield, rear cabin top windows, side windows, and the ice detector light lens has a life limit of 13,000 hours. Now, helicopters have quite a few life limited parts, and they're normally found in the airworthiness limitations schedule, which is often in section or chapter 4. Depends on the manufacturer where they put them. So folks performing inspection under 4315, they are required, here's the requirement: perform the inspection so as to determine that the aircraft meets all applicable airworthiness requirements, and this would include life limits. And the owner, no person may operate an aircraft unless the mandatory replacement times, inspection intervals, and related procedures contained in the airworthiness limitations section or ICA, or if it's an air carrier in the inspection program, or in FAA issued operation specs. So got to comply with the life limited parts. Now, people who remove life-limited parts are required under 4310 to comply with this. They have to ensure the part is controlled, and the method must deter the installation of the part after it's reached its life limit. And the goal is you don't want the part being installed once it's timed out. And it's to track the life status of the part while it's, within its service life. And they list, there's 6 different ways of complying with this. You can use a record keeping system. You can tag the part. You can use non-permanent marking, permanent marking, segregation, keeping the part segregated from other parts, or you can mutilate it so that it can never be installed. For temporary removal, you don't have to follow any of those. Let's say you just take a part off to facilitate other maintenance, and the life status of the part is not changed. It's performed on the same serial numbered product, and that product does not accumulate time in service while the life limited part is removed. So you can't take a life limited part out. The airplane flies around and comes back, and then you put this life limited part, for whatever reason, back into that aircraft, because a lot of times it's tied to the aircraft total time in service. So now you've just messed up the tracking for that life limited part. And when they say product, they mean aircraft, aircraft engine, or propeller. So transferring a part, 4310 says, if you're going to transfer the part, you have to mark, tag, or record it, like we just looked at, those 6 methods, or mutilate the part before it is sold or transferred. So one day I'm on Craigslist and I saw the category of aviation. So I looked in there and I saw this Bell 206 tail rotor assembly for $400. And it said that the documentation, time and service was lost. So it's sold as is. So no idea what the life limit on these parts are. And they actually list a lot of the different parts, part numbers. So I looked up the manual. And remember, in order to legally transfer these parts, they would have to be mutilated, tagged, or marked with their life limit status. So I looked up a couple of those part numbers, and it said that the tail rotor blade would have to be retired no later than July of 1981. So those parts are way out of, they've reached their limit. And that's what note 10 said for the tail rotor blade. So now where are we at? Well, we looked at approved design. We looked at how parts are properly produced, looked at how they're properly maintained, and all we have left is to look at documentation. So properly documented means the documentation must point to an approved design, proper production, and if the part has been worked on, it's got to have the maintenance records that comply with 43.9. Remember, maintenance means repair, inspection, so forth. You can find the definition of maintenance in 14 CFR 1.1. So normally a part supplier or distributor cannot certify a part as airworthy. Only the production approval holder or a person authorized to return to service under 43.7 that we've already looked at for used parts can certify the part as airworthy. Just an example of some of the maintenance documentation. Remember, 43.9 requires those items be in the maintenance record: description of work performed, date of completion, name of the person performing the work, and if the work was satisfactorily performed, the signature, certificate number, and the kind of certificate, whether it's A&P or repair station or air carrier, whatever. And there's an example of over there. You can see serviceable or yellow tags. Some repair stations use those. And there's the FAA Form 8130-3. Those are commonly used. Here's an example of all the different types of documentation you may encounter related to parts. Yellow tags usually means serviceable. Green tag means it's a repairable, generally. And red tag means it's unserviceable and probably can't be repaired, non-repairable. Got work orders, EASA Form 1, FAA Form 8130-3, logbook entries, so on and so forth. Purchase orders, direct ship authority. We're going to be looking at that a little bit more detail. And it's quite a list of documentation. And here is the direct ship authority. It is a written authorization. It allows a supplier to ship parts directly to an end user without going through a production approval holder's facility. So the PAH must specifically authorize the shipping supplier in writing, and they must establish procedures to make sure the shipped parts conform to the approved design and are in condition for safe operation, that they're airworthy. And I've got a couple examples here to show you. I was looking for Aviol, and I've been out of industry for a while, so now I guess Aviol was bought out by Boeing. And these are Piper parts. So do you think Boeing is the PAH for Piper parts? No, they're not. So they would have to have direct ship authority to ship Piper parts. Another example, Aircraft Spruce says they are now an authorized Lycoming distributor. And the easiest way would be for these suppliers to actually post their direct ship authority documents on their website. That way purchasers can be assured that they have the authority to ship parts on behalf of the PAH. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of phone calls and emails. Here's an example of a packing slip. And it says this material was produced and is direct shipped under the delegated items of air-equipped production, approval number such and such. So I would want to see a copy of that approval before I purchase from this vendor. I'd want to see that approval letter. And so upstairs in our office is the Manufacturing Inspection District Office, the MIDO. So I asked those folks if they could give me some examples, and they were nice enough to do that. And so here's a direct ship example. Here we have cinch connectors from McAllen, Texas, is giving cinch connectors of Reynosa, Mexico, authorization to inspect their connectors. So this is a delegated inspection. Here's the letter of authorization to cinch Reynosa for direct ship authority. Here's where they're actually giving them the authority to be a direct shipper. And the supplier should be able to provide a copy of this. Here's a packing slip. Most new parts will have a certificate of conformance statement. Just look at what they are certifying. Here's page 2 of that packing slip. Now here's where they reference the direct ship authority. It says this is a direct shipment of products that are marked FAA PMA and were produced under the terms of Cinch McAllen production approval. And it talks about their delegated inspection authority, and it says that they have a record of direct ship authority on file. and available to the FAA upon request. So I would want to see the actual authorization, make sure they do have the approval. Okay, so records of overhaul and rebuilding. That's talked about in Regulation 43.2. I created this chart as a quick reference to look at. The only real difference between overhaul and rebuilt is the testing. A rebuilt part is tested to ensure it meets new tolerance and limits, whereas an overhauled part is tested in accordance with approved standards and technical data or FAA acceptable data produced by a holder of the TC, STC, PMA, or TSO. And there was a legal interpretation that said a part, subcomponent of a larger assembly does not need to be disassembled if it is illogical or impossible to do, or if it would damage the part. And the bottom line in that was they said you follow the overhaul manual verbatim. If it tells you to tear it down to this certain point, then that's what you do. And that's the main difference. So parts distributors. If you'll reference AC 0056, it talks about how the FAA establishes accreditation organizations. And these are organizations that can audit distributors to make sure they conform with the standard, FAA standards. And currently, they only list 3 organizations that the FAA has recognized as an accreditation organization. They're listed there. And the basic process is the accreditation organization audits a distributor and they send them a letter if they pass the audit. The distributor then sends that approval letter to ASA, that's Aviation Suppliers Association. They've been selected to be the database manager. They have the list. And they get put on the list. And this is a voluntary thing. And if they're not on the list, it doesn't mean, I mean, it's not the only way that, you know, it could be a good distributor, but this does help folks determine if if it's a legitimate and trustworthy distributor. And if you look inside that AC, there is a link to that list. And so I went in there and clicked on it, and here's the first page that comes up. So there's the list of distributors that have met the criteria. They've passed the audit. And I typed in Boeing because earlier we looked at that Boeing, was selling those Piper parts. So I typed Boeing in the search window and came up with this. And you can see the accreditation over there. Looks like the ISO 9001 and so forth. And it gives their expiration date. So, parts receiving inspection. The objective is to determine if the part is eligible for installation. And remember what we've looked at. That means it's got an approved design, properly produced, appropriate for the application, properly maintained, properly documented. And there's a pretty good receiving inspection in AC 21-29, which is detecting and reporting suspected unapproved parts. And there's just a snippet of some of the things they recommend you have as part of your receiving inspection. I don't think that's the complete snip. I couldn't fit it all on one page and have you still be able to read it. So I came up with some bullets here, questions I would want to ask when I'm receiving a part. Obviously, I ordered it, so I know what I'm ordering. But is it approved or acceptable part? Was it properly produced? Is it appropriate for the installation? Is the part prohibited by an airworthiness directive? Is the part applicable to the model and serial number aircraft? Most IPCs, they have an applicability column. So you want to make sure it is applicable. Is the part properly documented? Was the part properly maintained? A lot of this is kind of redundant. We've already talked about it. What about used parts? Kind of the same thing. Still has to be properly produced, properly stored. Some parts, have storage requirements. You don't want it sitting out in the elements. Gyroscopic instruments, should be properly stored, for example. Is it properly marked? TSO or PMA have specific marking requirements. Is the data plate affixed and legible? Is the part airworthy? Conforms to type design and is in condition for safe operation. If it's a used part, so is it already ready to go? Has it been returned to service as airworthy? Or will it need to be tested, repaired, inspected, and returned to service? And remember, there's only certain people authorized to return to service. That's under 43.7. And there they are. More things to ask. Is it a used part or a new part? Is it rebuilt or overhauled? A lot of these are a lot of repeat of what we've already looked at. You want to make sure the paperwork lists the part number, the manufacturer, direct ship authorization, if it's coming from other than the manufacturer. And if it's a used part, was the part approved for return to service by an authorized person under 43.7? Okay, so what could possibly go wrong? Now we're going to start looking at some unapproved parts and hopefully give you some things to look for. There's a lot of unapproved or counterfeit parts in the system. There's some suspected unapproved parts. And I do want you to know there are laws now that have severe penalties for misrepresenting parts, false writing, entry, certification, document, record, data plate, electronic communication concerning any aviation part, and you can be subject to prison time. And also now part 3.5 holds all persons accountable for providing statements that are true and not misleading. Violators are subject now to criminal prosecution. So what's a false and misleading statement? Here's an example. Any statement made that's intended to deceive, falsely represent the material, or omits pertinent information that would otherwise deem the product unacceptable for installation on a type certificated product. Here's the examples. The enclosed part is equivalent to PMA part number, PMA 24 243-30-6. Couple good calibers there. The fact that the part is not FAA approved is omitted, and it implies the part is acceptable for substitution. So that's misleading. Second one is enclosed part is acceptable for installation on King Air Model 350 aircraft. There's no basis or traceability to support that statement with the part. And three, the enclosed part is like new or remanufactured. And here's a statement that's not necessarily false, but it contains an omission or misrepresentation about the product, could mislead the end user. Let's look at some of these examples from actual unapproved parts that through the investigation, this is what they found. So here's a vernier control manufactured by, doesn't say, it's blank. No TSO, PMA, TC, we don't know how it was produced. No direct ship authority. Here's a receipt or an invoice for a Garrett turbo rebuild. And if you read the little, I blew it up so you could see it in that block. They're talking about rebuilt items are warranted for 3 months or 25,000 miles. Sounds like an automotive shop lingo, not something related to aviation. So the red flag would immediately go up on this one. Here's one that it's a certification, but they're not really certifying anything. It says no implied, it conforms to whatever you said in your purchase order. But they do have some really nice stamps. Sometimes clever or indirect statements can raise suspicions. And if you look at this one, it says it's often traceable to the origin. So that's kind of sounds a little fishy. And remember, all this documentation was related to actual unapproved parts. Here's one where you have a vague or broad statement, and it says, produced in strict accordance to all requirements. Okay, what requirements? It conforms to all applicable drawings. What drawings? They should be listing the spec, the drawing, and notarized copies. How often do we ever see anything notarized on a packing slip or an invoice? Here is it says on this one, this is for an as removed part in block 12. And it looks to be from a certificated repair station in block 4, because there's a repair station number in block 4. And then this work order, it has 2 different work order numbers. And that could happen, but it's just starting to raise suspicions at this point. And the approval statement says, in accordance with Code of Federal Regulation 14. Well, our aviation regulations are 14 CFR, whatever, you know, part 43 is our main one, but and also repair stations use their repair station number, not an A&P number. And down in block 20, it's signed off with an A&P number. So a lot of red flags on this one. Without a trace. This one says condition is new surplus, but there's no traceability. Said if it's new surplus, traceability to the manufacturer or OEM is not available. Well, they should be able to trace the part back to the producer. And here's one where the revision date is 3 months after the date it was signed. So it was signed March of 2001, and then the form revision date is June of 01. So that's a red flag. Now here's an example of some actual unapproved parts that were found. Every the teardown inspection of these suspected unapproved parts found that none of those parts met specifications. Everything had to be red tagged. Here's a CSD generator housing. They welded the broken piece back in. Here's the inside view. Nice weld job. Notice in the welded section, there's no mounting holes. And then on the right is a completed part with the repaired area painted over, so you couldn't see that replaced section. Here's where the broken teeth were filled in with weld and then filed to shape. And I have to say, they're really good with the hand file. So those are the stages of their repair. And after they weld it, hand file it, they sandblast, mark, and prepare for shipping. And in the corner of this picture was the drill fixture to make the fake data plates for these parts. These are starter generator gears. And here we see the counterfeit identification plates. On the left are the approved or correct data plates, and on the right are the counterfeit data plates. And those ones didn't have the holes, the mounting holes drilled yet. And I guess during the court case, they were disputing that these were fake data plates, and they shook that fixture around and it popped open and a bunch of fake data plates fell out. So they lost their case right there. And here are the unapproved parts ready to be assembled. Here they are, all nice yellow tagged. And all of those in this picture are unapproved parts. Here's a turbine wheel. Another case of welding in the material and then filing it down. And this is kind of like additive manufacturing with welding. And it also, there's the picture of the spline. You can see the spline is also twisted. And when they tried to install it, it wouldn't seat. And so the mechanic called the vendor and they told him to use the hammer and a block of wood. And when that didn't work, they said, get a bigger hammer. Brake rotors. There's no approval to replace the spiders or the discs. And these spiders were welded to unapproved discs, then painted over with black paint. And the person even wrote their name on here, Brian. And this assembly would not fit when they tried to install it. That's when they knew something was not right. And so Brian, the way he checked them, he would do a drop check to see if the rivets rattled. That was his return to service test. Here's a TCAS controller. They found 3 defective ones that were modified to pass the press to test, and a near midair collision resulted. The person responsible was charged with tax evasion and sent to prison. I don't know about the other charges, but that's what they said. Now this one was repaired using coils of a lighter wire diameter. Coils burned out quickly, and they were also held in place with hot glue. And the person was located when an address label with his name and address was found inside the cover. So here's a case where an air carrier, they scrapped the gauge, threw it in the dumpster. 3 weeks later, they got a replacement, installed it, and the system failed. And upon installation, they found the serial number in their system as a part that they had thrown in the dumpster. So somebody was getting the items out of the dumpsters, selling them online with a nice new paint job. And the air carrier's receiving inspection was not thorough enough to catch it before it was installed. It was just a count and accept. Counterfeit logos. So the correct label is on the left. Notice the Eagle logo is in the top right corner. Well, when they printed it out on their printer, it rotated that logo. The label was smaller and it rotated the eagle so that it's over on the other edge. So that's a counterfeit label. Counterfeit yellow tags. An A&P was working at a print shop, and investigators discovered over 7,000 yellow tags containing information from many different repair stations. Here's a counterfeit swash plate support. And the first part broke upon installation, so they ordered another one. And when it wouldn't fit, the mechanic called the supplier and was told to heat the points with the torch, spread them apart, and install the bolts and let it cool. Well, the manager noticed this happening and called the FAA, and the investigation revealed this part was a counterfeit. Here's a counterfeit bearing spacers. On the left is the good OEM part, and on the right is the counterfeit part. Notice there's no shoulder sleeve on the right, and also the good OEM part has a stamped serial number, and the counterfeit part has an etched serial number. Counterfeit spacers. Notice the part number on that counterfeit part. It's got kind of a weird symbol at the end. The good part doesn't have that. And when you blow that up and you look at it, it's actually the investigation revealed that the producer of this part liked to gamble at Atlantic City, and he felt like he hit the jackpot with every sale. So he put the slot machine cherries on the counterfeit parts. There they are. And this did help identifying the counterfeit parts. Counterfeit seals, horse of a different color. The approved part on the left has a silver coloration, and the counterfeit part on the right is not silver. I don't know what color you'd call that, but it does look different. And the mechanic noticed the different color, and he was familiar with the others he had installed, so he called the type certificate holder and said they only make silver ones with clear coat, anodizing for a longer life limit. So that bronze color was found to be an iridite iodine finish, which would reduce the life limits of the parts. And an AD had to be issued with the information to get those about the color and the reduction of life limits. Here's some counterfeit brake pads. On the left are the good ones, and on the right are the bad ones. They're made overseas, and the material is so hard, they never wore out, but it created excessive heat and could result in a brake fire. And here's the rear view. You can see a little difference in the way the part number. There's a space on the counterfeit part, and there's no space on the good part. Standard hardware, it can also even be counterfeit. Special hardware. And this was found by the difference in the marking of the part number. And look at the difference in the machine finish on the shoulder. And this was not detected at the time of the receiving inspection. They actually went into service. Attention to detail. Here is a big press here, very expensive press used to forge brake housings. Here's some of the brake housings that it produced. On the left are the unapproved counterfeit part, and on the right is the approved part. Unapproved bearings. A mechanic bought the bearings, had the same part number at the local auto parts store. The bearing failed and led to an incident. Now, the Aviation bearings have the green colored seal, and the automotive have the black seal. So that was the difference. And the manufacturer said their aircraft bearings are designed to run at a higher RPM without failure. And the way they identified them was to use the green seals on the bearings with the harder material. Another example of bearings, same part number, but the seals, the color of the seal is different. Here is a conforming wire rope, mil spec 1/8 wire rope. It has that fiber filament in the middle of the rope that has the incorporated lubricant. And here is the non-conforming rope. There's no colored tracer filaments and no lubricant. And they're saying here to determine the existence of lubricant, wipe the center strand with a tissue or butcher paper. Life limited parts, past limits. Here's a turbine wheel. The yellow tag said return to service, time remaining. It didn't tell how many hours or anything. And so when called, the supplier said there were 400 hours remaining. Well, the part was installed and it failed within 10 hours. So they did a records inspection, called the PAH, and found that this was actually 100 hours past the limits. Making old parts look new. Now, the investigation here determined that this part was a military part with expired life limits. The bearings are painted over. That's something fishy. And the data plate was installed with double-backed carpet tape. Notice the paint bleed over on the edges. When we blow that picture up, you can see how the paint, it just looks, something doesn't look right. Open up the box, you smell a lot of fresh paint. Well, that's what happened with these fan blades. And when you, here's the inspector holding a fan blade, and you can even see the paint transfer onto his hand. And here's the falsified 8130-3 form for those blades. It says it's recertified to overhauled condition. Another example, here's a Pratt & Whitney PT6 engine. The good data plate is on the left. Notice assembly number and DOT type approval. And look at the bad counterfeit on the right. Notice the mounting hardware. You've got a slotted screw in one hole and a rivet in the other. So it's mounted to the engine in a strange way. And then when we blow up and look, covered on the first day in criminal school is abbreviations and spelling. Well, maybe not, because their abbreviation for assembly is ASSI, and they have a DOP type certificate instead of a DOT. So look for misspellings and attachment on these placards and labels. Well, we've heard of Rosemount Aerospace, but how many of us have heard of Rosemount Atrospace? Here's where on this one you can see the original markings. You can barely see them. They've been scratched off and they re-etched this part. On this one, the internal configuration didn't match what's shown on the data plate. There were some parts missing, and the data plate was also discovered to be counterfeit. And look at this one, is just the size of the label itself was a little bit different. I guess that's what they're showing here. Slightly different, 1/4 inch wider. Yeah, 2 1/4 versus 1 7/8. Test connector and press to test switch in this unit were glued in place, and they weren't even connected to any wiring. Here is the inside of the box. You've got a coax cable cut off, and we even have a printed circuit board that's taped with the word bad. And this came about back in 2011 when TCAS 2 you had to have TCAS 2 to be compliant, and that's pretty expensive. So this company in Russia was producing these counterfeit TCAS units, and they would mark their TTR 920 boxes to look like TTR 921 boxes. And notice there's no LEDs sticking through those holes. Okay, so we looked at a lot of examples. If you do come across a suspected unapproved part, different ways to report that. You can go to FAA.gov, and under aircraft safety, go to report safety issues. Go to programs. And then when that opens up, you'll see programs and initiatives. And there is your suspected unapproved parts program. Another way you can do it is call the FAA hotline. There's the 800 number. Or go to email FAA hotline at FAA.gov. Or you could mail a completed form off the website to that address. So there's a few different ways to report a suspected unapproved part. And if you have your phones out, if you desire to read the FAA unapproved parts notification, you can go to that web page. You can also sign up, and you'll get these UPN notifications by email. And I'm signed up to that, and every now and then I get a notification that they've found another unapproved part. And if you want more information about suspected unapproved parts program, here's a QR code for that. Giving you a second or two to take that one. Now this presentation it is being recorded, hopefully, if the technology works. And so you will be able to view it anytime at socialflight.com. And the way you, once you go to there, and you have to create an account, it's free, but it is a company that allows us to post these very large MP4 video files. And you view the video, take a little quiz, and you automatically get the credit. And I've got quite a few courses on there that I've created and presented. And if you want to find the course, in the top right corner under that icon, Fast FAA Credits, click on there, and it's got all our courses. Now, give me a week or two to get this posted. It does take me a little while because I have to make up a quiz to go with it. And SMS is coming to general aviation if you're interested in SMS. SMS is a safety management system, and it's basically policies, processes that can increase the safety and efficiency of any flight operation. And you can find more information there. The four main components are safety policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. And there they are. If you have any questions, you can send me an email. I would ask that maybe check all those references that I provided in the presentation, because we just, we tried to include as much as I could in this presentation, but obviously there's a lot more information available. And you can also contact your local FSDO if you have questions or concerns about parts. And but if you would like to have a question about something I covered here, that is my email. I don't want to take a whole lot of time on questions because I'm trying to keep this to a 1.5 hour presentation for the recording. But Ryan, you want to look at the chat, see if there's anything we can quickly address here?
Okay, you have some questions in the Q&A. Are these rules the same for Car 3 aircraft?
Yes. All aircraft.
I have a question here. Standard part, for example, an electrical butt splice, equivalent to an MS standard part, when MS standard part is not available.
Okay, what was the question again, Ryan? About the butt splice?
When an MS standard part is not available, how do you determine the equivalent?
Well, I'd want to look at the manufacturing specifications, and I would want to do a comparison with the MS part. It could be kind of difficult to determine that. It's probably best to go to a trusted distributor or to the actual aircraft manufacturer and use what they recommend. I know in the avionics shop, we purchased a lot of terminals and butt splices and things like that. We used Edmo was a big company we used to provide those. I guess they're standard parts. So I wouldn't want to go down and buy a kit from Walmart. One thing I know with the butt splices and electrical terminals and things like that, the insulation should be a clear, like transparent, where you can kind of see through that insulation. That was one of the things that we looked for. I'm not sure if I gave you a good answer on that, but I would be looking for equivalency or go to the manufacturer of the aircraft and ask them.
With parts availability difficult to come by from OEM, how can we utilize the same aircraft parts with traceability tags from serviceable aircraft that have no 8130-3?
Well, if it's from a serviceable aircraft, it's removed. I would want that particular part to be approved for return to service by somebody listed in 43.7. Because when you remove it from a serviceable aircraft, you don't really know the status of the part. There should be somebody signing a yellow tag 8130 or something that shows that part is approved for return to service. You have to have some indication that it's approved for return to service.
Okay, on the same thought line there, one of the things that's easily obtainable online is parts from salvage aircraft. What does someone need to look out for? They're getting a part off a salvaged aircraft that they're buying online.
On salvage aircraft parts or just used parts, you want to make sure that the part is approved for return to service by somebody listed in 43.7 that's authorized to approve for return to service. And you want to look at the maintenance record entry. What did they do to return it to service? Inspect it? Did they have to repair it? So on and so forth. So it has to meet the record requirements of 43.9. Should have their name, certificate number, and type of certificate, and the description of the work performed and the date. So it has to meet those requirements, but you would want it has to be returned to service. And I would also be careful that the aircraft was not in an accident. Usually an accident aircraft, a lot of the structural components are damaged or stressed beyond their type design. And so I would highly recommend you avoid any parts from an accident aircraft.
Right, in an earlier slide, you said that the owner-produced part couldn't be on an aircraft for sale. Does the installation of an owner-produced part eliminate the ability to sell the airplane at a later date?
No, it does not. You just can't make the part just to sell the part. You can make the part, repair the aircraft. That doesn't prohibit that aircraft from being sold at a later date. I would want to have good documentation like that example we had with the exhaust, that shows it was properly produced.
Okay. See, can an AMP produce an 8130 or only a repair station / manufacturer?
My understanding is 8130-3 is not to be used by A&Ps, only by a repair station or manufacturer.
Okay, and someone was asking to go back to the slide and show the 5 ways for an owner to produce a part. I think they get that when this goes online later. Can any and all parts be rebuilt, or if the appropriate documentation is available, overhauled?
Well, it all goes back to the manufacturer. They're the controller of their part. If there's a procedure, if there's a manual procedure from the manufacturer to do the work.
As a matter of fact, I can give you a good example of that. I know Robinson Helicopter restricts the reuse and inspection and return to service of a lot of parts. They really do a lot of their quality control by making you go back to the manufacturer for a lot of your work, major work on their helicopters and stuff. So yeah, I guess the manufacturer can restrict the overhaul of their produced parts.
Correct.
Okay, our plastic cabin parts such as door cards, headliners, or fresh air vents required to be from a certified source?
Well, I would say like the headliner would have to meet burn requirements. They, as part of the type design, they have to meet they'd have to have a burn certificate. Other plastic parts and things like that. I think one of the slides listed non-essential, an AC that covers non-essential equipment and furnishings. I think they cover that in there. So that would be a good AC to check.
Okay, how about, can you explain the difference between a TBO and a life limited part?
Well, a life limited part, it just has to be removed from service once it's reached its life limit. And of course, the time between overhaul is the time like an engine hour requirement between overhaul. And my understanding is Part 91 operators don't have to comply with TBO, whereas an air carrier Part 135 would have to. Not that it's a good idea to exceed the TBO, but the rules are different.
Okay, let's see. Not all hardware listed for a 60-year-old Cessna still exists. Where do you find accepted substitutes?
Well, hardware, if you can find standard hardware that meets the same criteria and specifications as the original, remember that's the standard, has to be returned to the original condition. So you would have to possibly do some testing of the original part as far as hardness or if the manufacturer can provide that information, and you'd have to find an equivalent substitute if it's a standard part.
That's about the end of our list there, Gary, and we are at an hour and a half.
All right, perfect. And I really appreciate everybody coming. And there's my email if you have more questions or let's see what else we got here. Also, training and peace of mind. Get your technical training, and you can document it under My AMT at our FAAsafety.gov website. And if you get 12 hours of training during the year, you can claim your bronze certificate, and you can print it out in January, and it's good to have. And I thank you for attending. And what are we showing here? At one point we had over 300 attendees, so really good turnout, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I'll try to make it available at socialflight.com, and you can go there and watch it. And if you click in the bottom right corner, watch on YouTube, you can rewind it, you can pause it, you can fast forward and all that. You won't get credit if you click that icon, but it does give you a little more flexibility. All right, I appreciate it. And until next time, I'm going to sign off here. And I have to stop the recording first because I do not want to forget that.